To service your Solix hubs, you will need the following: soft jaw pliers, bearing press, mallet, pick, 3mm flathead, grease, Demontech Freehub grease, Demontech Freehub oil, Solix bearing kit, and a Solix bearing toolkit. You can pick up the Solix bearing kit and the Solix bearing toolkit at industry9.com. The first step is to disassemble your hub. To disassemble your Solix hubs, you need to first remove the end caps from your axle. Use a set of soft jaw pliers and make sure not to damage the end caps. Once the end caps are off, you will need to remove the seals housed in the hub and the free hub. The seals can be removed with a pick. After the end caps and seals are removed, the free hub can be pulled off by hand. Remove the rib spacer from the axle and keep it with the free hub. With the end caps, seals, and the free hub now removed, you will be left with an axle that is exposed on both sides. With a mallet, tap from the drive side to dislodge the bearing and axle from the brake rotor side. The axle has shoulders that contact the inner race of the bearing and will drive the bearing out of the hub shell. Reinsert the axle and use it to drive out the drive side bearing in the same manner you removed the first. The remaining bearing can also be removed with a blind bearing puller or carefully with a punch and a mallet. You can then access and service the free hub seal if needed. Use a 3mm flathead or pick to dislodge the free hub seal. You can replace the seal at this time if damaged. Now let's service our free hub. Use a pick to slide the pawls out of their pockets. Once the drive components are removed from the free hub shell, there will be one inboard and one outboard bearing with a cylindrical spacer between them. The cylindrical spacer can be shifted out of the way to access the inner race of the bearings. Carefully remove the outermost bearing with a blind bearing puller or tap it out with a drift or a punch. Once the outermost bearing is removed, this will allow the spacer to be removed as well. Using a 3mm flathead, you can remove the retaining ring securing the remaining bearing. The remaining bearing should be removed to the outboard side of the free hub using the non-drive side of the rear axle as a tool. Now we'll reassemble the free hub. Start by pressing the inboard double row bearing into the outboard side of the free hub using a bearing press. Reinstall the retaining ring and ensure it's snapped into position. Place the cylindrical spacer into the free hub before pressing the outboard bearing. Press the outboard side bearing into the outboard side of the free hub while at the same time supporting the inner race of the inboard bearing with the rib spacer that was pulled from the rear axle. To insert the pawls back into their pockets, depress on the springs and slide them in. Be aware that the 3 teeth on the pawls face the drive ring. Apply a drop of Demontech Freehub grease to the drive ring and pawls, and apply a drop of oil to the Freehub seal. Now we can assemble the rear hub. Start by lining the inside of your clean bearing bores with a thin film of grease. Then press the drive side bearing into the drive side of the hub using a flat bearing press. Make sure the concave washer is in place and oriented correctly on the axle shoulder. And then insert the axle through the non-drive side of the hub. Press the non-drive side bearing over the end of the axle into the non-drive side of the hub shell with a flat bearing press. This will now leave you with a hub shell that has an axle held captive by 2 bearings. Now we'll push the free hub onto the axle. Be sure that the free hub's inner spacer is centered. Once the free hub makes contact with the drive ring, continue to gently press it onto the hub while twisting it counterclockwise to engage the pawls into the drive ring. With the bearings, axle, and free hub installed, you can now install the end cap seals into the hub and free hub. Install the seals with the lip facing out and apply a film of grease to the seal faces. Use a bearing press or pick to ensure the seals are fully seated against the bearing. Once the seals are installed, you can press the end caps onto the axle to complete your rear hub assembly. Put a film of marine grade or other waterproof grease onto the front face of the bearing seal before installing. Note that when pushing the end caps on, grease may seep out of the edges. Be sure to wipe any excess away. Now let's disassemble the front hub. The front hub's end caps are held in place with an O-ring seated in the end cap. Protect the end caps by using a set of soft jaw pliers. Once the end caps are removed, you will need to remove the seals housed in the hub. These can be removed with a pick. With the end caps and seals removed, you can now remove the bearings. These can be removed by placing the red axle removal drift in the drive side axle and using a mallet to dislodge the non-drive side bearing. Reinsert the axle and axle removal drift and use it to drive out the drive side bearing in the same manner you removed the first. The remaining bearing can also be removed with a blind bearing puller or carefully with a punch and a mallet. Now we'll reassemble our front hub. Start by lining the inside of your clean bearing bores with a thin film of grease. Then press the non-drive side bearing into the non-drive side of the hub using a bearing press. After the non-drive side bearing has been pressed in, insert the hub's axle through the drive side. Press the drive side bearing over the end of the axle into the drive side of the hub shell. With the bearings and axle installed, you can now install the end cap seals into the hub. Install the seals with the lip facing out and apply a film of grease to the seal faces. Use a bearing press or a pick to ensure the seals are fully seated against the bearings. Once the seals are installed, you can press the end caps onto the axle to complete your front hub assembly. Put a film of marine grade or other waterproof grease onto the front face of the bearing seal before installing. Again, note that when pushing the end caps on, grease may seep out of the edges, so be sure to wipe any excess grease away.